Her cruel family forced her to marry a beggar, not knowing he was the lost Alpha King. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character, Emily Davis. Emily's life had never been what she dreamed it would be. Born into a family of wealth and influence, she had always felt like an outsider in her own home. Her father, once a powerful and respected man in their kingdom, had grown distant, consumed by business and social obligations. Her stepmother, on the other hand, was cold, calculating, and ever so eager to secure the family's place among the most powerful in the land. Emily's every move had been scrutinized, her every word measured. She was expected to be the perfect lady, always poised, always obedient. But the pressure of perfection was unbearable. She had once hoped that her family would support her dreams, that they would care for her happiness. Instead, her stepmother and father had turned her into a pawn in their political game. She had no choice but to marry a man she didn't love, someone her family had chosen for her. But the man they selected was not some noble suitor or wealthy merchant. No, he was a beggar, a man with no title, no wealth, and no apparent future. He was Lucas Reed, a man whose humble appearance and poor condition only made Emily's situation worse. Her stepmother had insisted that it was a good match for her, a way to ensure that she would learn humility and strength. But Emily had no intention of spending her life with a man she didn't even know. It wasn't the life she wanted. It wasn't the love she had hoped for. And yet, she had no choice. The wedding was set, the arrangements made, and there was no way for her to escape the fate her family had chosen for her. On the day of the ceremony, Emily's heart weighed heavy in her chest. She had spent the last few days in turmoil, trying to make sense of the situation, but no amount of reasoning could change her reality. She was going to marry a man who had nothing to offer her but an uncertain future. As she stood at the altar, waiting for the ceremony to begin, she couldn't help but wonder how her life had come to this point. She had always thought that love would come naturally, that it would be something that would find her when the time was right. But now, she felt nothing but dread. Lucas stood across from her, looking every bit the part of the beggar he was said to be. His clothes were ragged, and his face was unshaven, but there was something about his eyes that made her pause. There was a depth in them, a silent strength that she couldn't quite understand. He seemed so different from the man she had imagined. Perhaps she was wrong about him, she thought. Maybe there was more to him than meets the eye. Little did she know, Lucas was not the man she believed him to be. He was not just a beggar, not just some poor soul caught in the web of fate. He was, in fact, the Alpha King, the lost ruler of their lands, his true identity hidden beneath the guise of a humble wanderer. His memory had been wiped, and he had been forced into exile, but destiny had brought him back, and it was about to change everything for Emily. She had no idea that this marriage, this union forced upon her by her cruel family, would be the beginning of a journey she never could have imagined. Emily's life with Lucas had been anything but ordinary. The day they wed, she had expected to feel nothing but dread, but as time went on, something unexpected began to stir inside her. She had married him out of obligation, not love, but the more she saw him, the more her perception began to shift. He was not what she had imagined. Despite his ragged clothes and quiet demeanor, there was a certain grace about him, a stillness that hinted at strength. His presence was commanding in ways she couldn't quite explain. It was as though he was a man playing a role, hiding something much deeper. In the beginning, Emily had kept her distance. Her heart still heavy with the burden of her family's decision. But over the course of their days together, she began to notice small things. The way Lucas moved, with an ease that seemed too practiced for someone who had lived as a beggar. The way he would gaze out of the window sometimes, his expression distant, as if he was searching for something long lost. One evening, as Emily sat by the fire, quietly stitching a piece of cloth, she caught a glimpse of Lucas staring out the window again. This time, his eyes seemed different, focused, intense. There was something more to him, something she had missed before. The quiet man who had once appeared so helpless was no longer just a beggar in her eyes. "What's on your mind?" Emily asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. Lucas turned to her, a faint smile touching his lips. "Just thinking," he replied, though his words didn't seem to match the weight in his gaze. Emily set down the piece of cloth she was working on and studied him. She had never seen him truly smile, and though it was small, the expression changed something between them. It was as though a veil had lifted, revealing a side of him she had never expected. Over the next few weeks, their interactions became more frequent, more open. Lucas was never quite the man she had imagined him to be, and Emily found herself slowly letting go of her initial resentment. They spent their days talking about trivial matters, but beneath the surface, there was an unspoken understanding growing between them. The more she learned about him, the more she realized how little she actually knew. His past was a mystery, and despite her curiosity, he never spoke of it. The only thing that was clear was his quiet strength, his unwavering composure in the face of hardship. It wasn't long before Emily started feeling a strange pull toward him. She couldn't quite put it into words, but it was as if something inside her had recognized him, something deep within her that she hadn't expected to awaken. There were nights when she would lie awake, wondering about the man she had married, and why she couldn't ignore the growing connection between them. One morning, as they sat together at the table, Emily noticed something different. Lucas's hands, which had always seemed so rough and worn, were now steady, confident. He moved with a grace she hadn't seen before. And in that moment, Emily's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew she couldn't deny the truth any longer. This man, this beggar, was not who he had seemed. And deep down, she felt as if her life, her destiny, was changing in ways she couldn't yet understand. The days passed, and Emily's thoughts of Lucas began to change in ways she never imagined. The more she observed him, the more she realized how little she truly knew about him. His quiet demeanor, his strength, and the mysterious aura surrounding him piqued her curiosity. They had spent countless hours together, but still, he remained a mystery. Emily had never considered herself the type to be fascinated by a man like him, yet here she was, thinking about him more than she'd like to admit. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Lucas spoke in a way that made Emily pause. "You've been quieter lately," he said, his voice soft but steady. Emily glanced at him, not sure how to respond. She had been trying to understand the strange feelings that were building up inside her, but it wasn't easy. "I'm just thinking," she replied, her voice betraying the uncertainty she felt. Lucas nodded, his eyes searching hers. "I can see that. You've been distant." Emily shifted uncomfortably. She wanted to tell him everything, about the confusion, the strange pull she felt toward him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just tired," she said, trying to brush it off. Lucas didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press her further. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward the window. For a moment, Emily watched him, the way he sat, his posture relaxed but poised, as if he was waiting for something. Something about the way he held himself made her heart race, but she couldn't explain why. It wasn't long before the evening passed, and as the fire dwindled down to embers, Emily excused herself to her room. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the events of the day. The more she thought about Lucas, the more she realized that there was something undeniable about him. He wasn't just a beggar. He couldn't be. There was a depth to him that went beyond what she had seen. As the days went by, Emily found herself growing more restless. She couldn't ignore the connection between them any longer, but at the same time, she didn't know what it meant. One morning, as Emily was outside gathering herbs, Lucas appeared at the doorway. His presence was always steady, but today, there was something different in his eyes, something that made Emily's pulse quicken. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his tone gentle but firm. Emily froze for a moment, caught off guard by his words. She hadn't realized how much she had been pulling away until he pointed it out. "I'm not avoiding you," she replied quickly, her voice betraying her unease. Lucas took a step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "I know you're not. But you've been keeping something from me. I can see it in your eyes." Emily swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. She had been trying to keep her emotions in check, but it was getting harder every day. She had never felt this way about anyone before. The pull she felt toward him was like nothing she had ever experienced. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but even as she spoke, she knew he could see through her. Lucas's expression softened, and he took another step closer. "You don't have to tell me, not yet. But I know something's changing between us. I can feel it." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined that the man she had married out of obligation would become the center of her world. She didn't understand why she felt this way, but she knew one thing for sure: everything was about to change. The tension between Emily and Lucas had been building for days, and as much as she tried to ignore it, there was no escaping the truth any longer. She had started to see him in a way she never expected. He wasn't just the beggar her family had chosen for her to marry. There was something more to him, something deeper that she couldn't deny. The way he moved, the quiet strength he carried, and the way his eyes seemed to hold 1,000 secrets, all of it drew her in. But there was still a barrier, something she couldn't cross. She wasn't sure if it was fear, uncertainty, or simply the years of conditioning she had endured, but the distance remained. One afternoon, as she was walking through the garden, she found herself alone with Lucas again. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden hue over the garden, but Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She could hear Lucas approaching, his footsteps soft on the cobblestone path. "You've been avoiding me again," he said, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it, a hint of something she couldn't place. Emily didn't turn to face him immediately. She could feel his presence behind her, the pull of his gaze. "I haven't been avoiding you," she said, though even she could hear the lie in her voice. "Then what is it?" Lucas asked, stepping closer. Emily turned, meeting his eyes for the first time in days. The intensity in his gaze caught her off guard. She wanted to look away, to hide the emotions she knew were written all over her face, but she couldn't. "I'm not sure," she whispered. "I don't know what this is. What we are." Lucas took another step closer, his expression softening. "I know you're confused, but you don't have to be afraid." Emily's heart skipped a beat at his words. How did he always know exactly what to say? "I'm not afraid," she replied, though she wasn't sure if it was the truth. "Then what is it?" Lucas asked gently. Emily took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had been fighting it for so long, pretending like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. She wasn't the same person she was before she met him. The more she tried to deny it, the more she realized she couldn't. "I don't know how to explain it," she said finally. "But when I'm with you, I feel something I never expected." Lucas smiled, a small, knowing smile that made her heart race. "I feel it too," he said quietly. For a moment, Emily thought she might say something else, something more, but she didn't. Instead, they stood in silence, the air between them charged with something unspoken. The evening stretched on, and with each passing minute, Emily felt her walls start to crumble. She had spent so much time pretending she didn't care, but now it was impossible to ignore the truth. She had never imagined that her life would turn out like this, that the man she had once thought of as nothing more than a beggar would become the one she couldn't stop thinking about. But here she was, and everything was different. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily knew that she could no longer deny the connection between them. She wasn't sure what it meant, or what would come of it, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days passed in a strange haze for Emily. The air around her seemed to shift with every glance she stole at Lucas, every word exchanged between them. She couldn't help but feel the pull, the undeniable connection that had started as something small, but now felt all-encompassing. She had never believed in fate, or in the idea of a soulmate, but now, in his presence, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something bigger was at play. She still didn't know the full extent of who Lucas was, or why he had come into her life, but she was beginning to suspect that the answers were far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. One evening, after a long day of silence between them, Lucas finally spoke again. "You're thinking about something," he said softly, his voice steady as ever. Emily looked up from her hands, which had been idly twisting a piece of cloth she had been sewing. His gaze was fixed on her, as if he could see into her very soul. She hesitated, her heart racing as she tried to process her emotions. I don't know how to explain it, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. But something's changed. I feel like I've known you forever, even though I've just met you. Lucas's eyes softened, and for the first time, Emily saw a glimpse of vulnerability in him. It's the same for me, he replied, his voice low, almost a murmur. I don't know what it is, but it's as if we were meant to find each other. The weight of his words hung in the air, and Emily felt the truth in them, even though she had no idea what it meant. She knew she was starting to fall for him, and that terrified her. Everything she had been taught to believe, everything her family had drilled into her, was being thrown out the window. She had never imagined herself being in love with someone like him, a man she had once thought of as nothing more than a beggar. But now, she couldn't deny it. Her heart was calling out to him in a way she couldn't explain, and every day that passed only made it stronger. Lucas, she began, her voice trembling with uncertainty, there's something I need to know. Who are you really? The question hung between them, and for a moment, she saw his expression falter. But then, just as quickly, his mask of calm returned. He took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to answer. I'm not who you think I am, he said slowly, his voice quiet but firm. I never wanted to be the person I've become. But it's who I am now. Emily frowned, confused by his words. What do you mean? I was once someone else, Lucas continued, his gaze distant as he seemed to lose himself in memories. I was an alpha, a leader of a kingdom. But I lost everything, my family, my name, my kingdom. I've been living as a shadow of who I once was, hiding from the world, hiding from myself. The revelation hit Emily like a wave, and for a moment, she was speechless. She had suspected there was something more to Lucas, but she had never imagined this. You were an Alpha King, she whispered, her mind reeling. Lucas nodded slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a sorrow she had never seen before. I was, and in many ways, I still am. But I don't remember it all. I don't remember the life I once had. All I know is that I'm lost, and I've been trying to find my way back. Emily stood there, staring at him, her mind trying to process the truth he had just shared. The man she had married, the man she had once thought of as a beggar, was the very thing her family had never wanted her to marry. He was the lost Alpha King, and his destiny was tied to a world she didn't fully understand. And yet, despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to turn away. Instead, she took a step toward him, her heart urging her to follow whatever path this was leading them on. I don't know what this means for us, Emily said softly, her voice trembling, but I know that I don't want to lose you. Lucas stepped forward, his expression softening as he reached out to take her hand. You won't lose me, he said quietly, his voice full of resolve. Not now, not ever. In that moment, Emily knew that everything had changed. The world she had once known, the life she had thought she was bound to, had shattered. And in its place, a new life was beginning, one filled with uncertainty, but also with the promise of something greater. Something destined. Something she couldn't ignore any longer. Days passed, and the weight of Lucas's revelation lingered in Emily's mind. She had never imagined that her life would turn out this way, married to a man who was not only hiding his true identity but was also the heir to a throne she knew little about. Her heart and mind were torn between the life she had always known and the new reality Lucas had introduced her to. As they spent more time together, Lucas seemed to grow more distant, as if the truth he had shared with her had shifted something between them. She could feel it in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just the burden of his past, it was the weight of their future. One evening, after they had finished their quiet dinner, Lucas stood by the window, staring into the night as if he could see something far beyond the horizon. Emily watched him for a moment, the glow of the candlelight casting shadows across his face, and she couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward him. It was as if they were two people bound by fate, but the distance between them grew with every passing day. She knew she had to ask him the questions that had been weighing on her heart. Lucas, she said softly, her voice trembling just slightly, what happens now? Now that you've told me who you are. What do we do? Lucas turned to her, his gaze unreadable. I don't know, Emily. I've spent years running from who I was, from the life I was supposed to lead. I don't even know how to return to it. Emily felt a pang of sympathy for him, but at the same time, there was a part of her that couldn't ignore the questions that had begun to form in her own heart. Do you want to return to it? To your kingdom, your throne, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas took a long, deep breath, as if the weight of her words had struck him harder than he expected. I don't know, he said finally. I was once a ruler, but now I'm not sure who I am anymore. All I know is that I don't want to lose you, Emily. His words hit her like a storm. She had never expected to hear him say that. She had been waiting for him to make his choice, to decide what path he would take, but hearing him say he didn't want to lose her made her heart race. I don't want to lose you either, she said, stepping closer to him. The tension that had been building between them seemed to crackle in the air as she reached out to touch his arm. He turned toward her, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the only sound being the soft crackling of the fire. Emily's heart was beating faster now, and she knew that she couldn't ignore the connection between them any longer. It wasn't just a simple attraction, it was something deeper, something that felt like it had been written in the stars. What does this mean for us? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Lucas looked at her for a long moment before speaking, his voice low and steady. I don't know what the future holds, Emily. But I know that I want to face it with you. Whatever happens, I don't want to do it alone. His words stirred something deep within her, and for the first time, she felt like she was seeing him as he truly was, not just the beggar she had once thought him to be, but the lost king who had come into her life when she needed him most. The confusion and uncertainty of the past few days began to fade, replaced by a sense of clarity. She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain, they were in this together. And no matter what the future held, she knew she couldn't walk away now. As Lucas reached out and gently took her hand, Emily felt a spark of hope ignite within her. She didn't know what the road ahead would look like, but she knew they would face it side by side. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed felt like a dream, one that Emily wasn't sure if she was ready to wake from. Each passing moment seemed to pull her deeper into the reality of what she and Lucas were becoming. She had never anticipated a life like this, never imagined that the beggar she had been forced to marry would turn out to be the very man her heart had been searching for. The more time she spent with him, the clearer it became that they were bound together by something greater than circumstance. But even as their bond grew, the future loomed over them like a shadow, uncertain and filled with unanswered questions. Emily knew that the world they lived in would never accept their union. Her family, the kingdom, society itself, all held rigid expectations about what was proper, about who she should be with. And Lucas, despite his true identity, was still a man who had been cast aside, forgotten by those who once knew him as a king. Emily and Lucas had discussed the past, the life he had lost, the throne he had abandoned, but every conversation seemed to raise more questions than answers. Lucas, for all his strength and quiet resolve, seemed torn between the life he had once lived and the simple life he now shared with Emily. He had become someone different, someone he had never imagined he would be. And Emily, though she knew she loved him, couldn't help but wonder if this was the life he truly wanted. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden together, the air warm and still, Emily watched Lucas as he worked quietly beside her, his hands moving with the kind of precision that spoke of years of training. He was a man who had once commanded armies, ruled over a kingdom, and yet here he was, tending to the small garden in the courtyard. The contrast was striking, but in a way, it made him even more real to her. He wasn't just a lost king anymore, he was the man she had come to love. Do you ever wish things were different? She asked softly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Lucas paused, looking up at her with a mixture of surprise and contemplation. What do you mean? He asked, his voice gentle. Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to frame her thoughts. Do you ever wish you hadn't lost everything? That you could go back to the way things were, before everything changed? Lucas set down the small tool he had been using and walked over to her, sitting down beside her on the bench. He stared out at the garden, his eyes distant as though he was seeing something beyond the walls of the small courtyard. There are days when I think about it, he admitted. About the life I lost, the people I once knew. But then I remember where I am now, what I have now. And it doesn't feel like a loss anymore. Emily turned to him, her heart swelling with emotion. You mean, me? She asked softly. Lucas turned his head to meet her gaze, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. His eyes were filled with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Yes, he said quietly. You. I never imagined I would find something worth fighting for again, but you. His voice trailed off as he reached out to gently touch her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. Emily felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of belonging she had never known before. I didn't think I would ever find peace, Lucas continued, his voice barely a whisper. But I find it with you. Emily's heart fluttered in her chest. She had always thought that love was a fleeting feeling, something that came and went with time, but now, she realized it was something much deeper. It was a connection, a bond that couldn't be broken by the past or by the expectations of others. I don't want to lose you, Emily said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Lucas gave her a small smile, his hand tightening around hers. You won't, he said. Not now, not ever. For the first time since they had met, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't know what the future would bring, or what they would face together, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was. Meant to be, by his side. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Emily realized that they had both found something they had been searching for in each other, a future, a place to belong, and a love that defied all odds. The days had turned into weeks, and Emily found herself growing more comfortable in the new life she was building with Lucas. They had settled into a routine, one that felt familiar yet strange. The quiet moments they shared, the small tasks that brought them closer together, were becoming the foundation of something neither of them had expected. Despite the peace they had found, there was always a lingering uncertainty hanging over them. Lucas had not yet shared the full extent of his past, and Emily wondered how long it would be before he was ready to confront it fully. One evening, as the stars began to fill the sky, Emily sat in the garden, watching the gentle sway of the trees in the breeze. The warmth of the day had faded, and the coolness of the night was a welcome change. She had been lost in her thoughts when she heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. Turning, she saw Lucas walking toward her, his expression unreadable. You've been quiet tonight, he said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of something unspoken. Emily smiled faintly, trying to ease the tension that she felt between them. Just thinking, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas sat down beside her, his presence filling the space in a way that made her feel both calm and unsettled. About what? He asked, his gaze never leaving hers. Emily hesitated, unsure of how to put her thoughts into words. About us, she said finally. About everything that's changed. Lucas's expression softened, and for the first time in a long while, he seemed to relax. I know, he said quietly. Things have changed for both of us. Emily turned to face him, her heart racing. But are you happy? She asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Lucas seemed taken aback by the question, but then he smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. I didn't think I could be, he said, his voice full of sincerity. But I am. I'm happier than I've been in years, Emily. I never thought I would find this kind of peace again. Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had been afraid that their happiness was fleeting, that the past would always come back to haunt them. But hearing him say those words made her feel like they were moving forward, together. I'm happy too, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. But I'm also scared. Lucas took her hand in his touch warm and comforting. Scared of what? He asked gently. Emily bit her lip, trying to find the right words. Scared of losing what we have. Scared that one day everything will fall apart. Lucas squeezed her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. I won't let that happen, he said, his voice full of determination. We've both been through so much, and I'm not going to let anything tear us apart. Emily looked into his eyes, and in that moment, she saw the sincerity in his words. She believed him. I trust you, she whispered, the words coming from the depths of her heart. Lucas smiled, his eyes filled with emotion. Then we'll face everything together, he said, his voice steady and strong. Emily nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her heart. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace. She had found someone who understood her, who saw her for who she really was, and together, they would face whatever the future held. As they sat there, side by side, the world around them seemed to fade away. The past no longer haunted them, and the future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they had each other, and that was all they needed. Lucas and Emily knew that their journey was far from over, but they were ready to face it together, hand in hand, no matter what came next. As the days went by, Emily and Lucas continued to grow closer. Their bond had become something unspoken but undeniable, a connection that neither of them could ignore. Lucas had shared his past, his lost kingdom, and the struggles he had faced, but it didn't change the way Emily felt about him. She didn't see the king who had once ruled a vast land, she saw the man who had been by her side, the man who had fought through his own darkness and come out stronger. Lucas, in turn, saw Emily not just as the woman he had married out of necessity but as the woman who had helped him rediscover a part of himself he thought was lost forever. He had never imagined finding someone who understood him so completely, someone who didn't see his crown or his title but saw him for who he truly was. But even as they found solace in each other, the world around them continued to press on. Emily's family still disapproved of her marriage, still treated Lucas with disdain, and the shadow of their rejection loomed over her. One afternoon, as they were walking through the garden, Lucas spoke up, his voice laced with determination. "Emily, we can't keep hiding forever. The world will never accept us, and we can't let fear dictate our lives." Emily looked at him, her heart heavy. "I don't want to lose you, Lucas. But I don't know if I'm strong enough to face the world, to face my family's judgment." Lucas stopped walking, turning to her with a fierce look in his eyes. "You don't have to face it alone. We'll face it together, no matter what happens. You're not the only one who's been hiding from the world. I've spent years running from my past, from the responsibility that comes with being who I am. But now, with you by my side, I feel like I can finally stand up and fight for what's right." Emily felt a rush of emotions flood her heart. She had always feared standing up to her family, feared the consequences of defying them, but in that moment, she realized that Lucas was right. They couldn't hide forever. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm scared of losing everything, of losing you." Lucas took her hands in his touch warm and reassuring. "You won't lose me," he said, his voice firm. "We're in this together, and I'll never leave your side." Emily nodded, a sense of resolve settling within her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it. Together, they would confront the challenges ahead, and together, they would find their place in a world that hadn't been kind to them. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but also with a renewed sense of purpose. Lucas began to take steps toward reclaiming his rightful place, seeking allies who would stand by him as he worked to restore his kingdom. Emily stood by him every step of the way, offering her support and strength when he needed it most. The road ahead was long, and there were many battles to fight, both external and internal. But Emily knew one thing for certain: no matter what happened, she and Lucas were meant to be together. They had found something in each other that neither of them had expected, but that was worth fighting for. And with that knowledge, they faced the future, not as a king and his wife, but as two people who had found each other against all odds, determined to build a life that was their own.